Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Addams Family from 2019. I think The Addams Family is an interesting franchise in terms of media as a whole, going from comic strip to TV show to feature film to now an animated feature film, and even being an animated series a couple times, in that it mostly worked best in both comic strip form and as a TV sitcom, in that it was playing off of something. It was a juxtaposition, the idea of, this normal kind of sitcom tropey family, and you have the kind of normal sitcom kind of tropes that you're used to, the kind of normal sitcom thing, and they were this dastardly, different kind of spooky family and so forth. And even though they were doing all these ghouly, spooky things and try to kill each other and all that, they still loved each other very much and could kind of do more off-color things. And I like the Addams Family TV show. It's been a long time since I watched it, but I remember liking it quite a bit. When you get into animation, it's not really playing off of those tropes, and it's not playing any sort of difference in terms of any sort of media. And I know that this was trying to play more off of the comic strip that was actually created by Charles Addams, that were like these New Yorkers things. They were actually named after him just because they didn't really have a name. They were just like this comic strip, and so they became the Addams Family. The designs are more based on those designs of the classic comic strip, but I think it doesn't really feel as spooky and as fun in really any of the animated things I've ever seen. But since I am talking about this movie, it doesn't feel that way in this movie. And I think a lot of that is partly because this story doesn't really understand what the focus of the story overall really is, as well as it doesn't really fully understand what the Addams are playing against, which is really important. If you're playing against a trope, a type, or a person, you have to understand what you are playing against, because otherwise you're just kind of off into whatever. And they are spooky and kooky and they're fun characters, but you're not really showing what really they can do and why people love these things. And this film obviously really gets that the Addams Family is a major big franchise. It even at the end before the credits does the theme song, and it references the theme song a lot of times, which is weird to me because I don't think any of the kids in the theater have ever probably seen the show ever. I took my daughter, and I know she has never seen the show. I was kind of confused by that because it was this is clearly more for the parents, but I guess the love for it is strong enough. But basically, this movie turns to be a kind of subpar version of what Hotel Transylvania is, in that in those you're having the monsters having to deal with the human world and kind of how to fit within it. And in this, they do that, but it's more, I guess, through the kids' eyes, much like Mavis in the Hotel Transylvania films. You have Pugsley and Wednesday kind of dealing with their parents' expectations, but at the same time this film wants to do this thing where they always get chased off by normal people and they're really more afraid of these people and all this stuff. That is what opens the movie, that's what closes the movie, but in between that you get this whole Wednesday and Pugsley thing, which is never really structured very well. The Wednesday thing I think is in some cases, but this is a really bad script that doesn't entirely know what its focus is. It's trying to give too many of the characters plot lines and not really understanding why those plot lines and what those plot lines are really saying. I think the Wednesday and Pugsley plot line could be really interesting. He's trying to do this thing called the Mazurka, which involves a sword, which you never really fully understand, but it's basically a stand-in for a bar mitzvah, basically. That seems to be, they heavily imply it a couple times. And then Wednesday is not sure how she wants to kind of venture off into the woods and out from the castle, and starts to explore the kind of neighborhood around, and becomes friends with a girl in the town and goes to school and is dealing with how her mom views her versus how she views herself and everything like that. I actually think that could have been a much better movie, but because this film is so unfocused, it kind of becomes really unremarkable. Although also that it's not funny, that it's a typically overcast kind of animated film. It's decently entertaining, but in that kind of blah kind of way. It sort of misses the entire point of the Addams Family. I know this originally was going to be a stop motion animated film from Tim Burton. They even shot test footage, which apparently is in the Tim Burton exhibit now, but wasn't when I saw it. So at one point, Illumination and Tim Burton were going to make this film, and it was going to be stop motion and black and white, and that sounds really cool. I don't think any of that lived on to what this became, but I think he would have probably structured it a lot better, or I believe he would. But this film, I think ultimately it's wants to have a story with the Addams Family. It has bits and pieces of it. One of the first, I think, episodes of the TV show I read involved Wednesday coming back from school, and like it inhabits concepts that this franchise has done many, many times, but it's not really saying anything with it, and it doesn't really understand what the focus of this film is. This town, which this plotline is really boring, about a home decorating show. This home decorating woman has a show played by Allison Janney, who's the mom of the girl, of course, that Wednesday is friends with. She's like renovated this whole suburban town, and she's trying to sell them all off on the big like end of her TV show, which sounds pretty unrealistic, but I never watched those shows and know nothing about them, so maybe it's based on something I really don't know. That plotline didn't really work well. They very blatantly call the neighborhood assimilation, which this film never really gets into and plays with, so it's on the nose in a way that doesn't really connect to anything. So it's just like being like, look what we did here, and I'm like, okay. I just don't fully get the purpose of making this film, and after watching it, I still don't get what they were doing, other than going like, well, Hotel Transylvania did really well in October and we have the Addams Family rights, so let's do it. I think there are still interesting things you could do with this franchise, and I think certain people could have fun with it, and you have actually, it's, even though it's way overcast, it's actually cast very well, between Oscar Isaacs as Gomez and Charlize Theron voicing Morticia, and Chloe Grace Moretz voicing Wednesday does a great job. And I think it's overcast, but it's well cast in its overcastness. But the whole time I was watching, I never really got why they're doing it other than the brand recognition of it, and that made it relatively boring. And if the script had sort of wrapped it all up or contained it or given it some story it was ultimately telling, instead of the three stories it was telling, and I think the main story it acts like it's telling, that they like always get chased out and people freak out by them, which in some ways yes, but in other ways, like in the opening thing, they're just people who are getting married who get chased off. In the rest of the movie, you know, they're kind of sometimes antagonizing them in a certain way, sometimes just like by mistake, but other times they're clearly like messing with them, and like that's a different scenario, and they never really get into that. And then, but the Wednesday and Pugsley things I thought worked really well, because you know, you grew up this one way, and because you grew up this one way in the spooky house, you will then, you know, become like eventually probably a different person. And this movie like doesn't really get into that. I didn't think, you know, Wednesday should like, you know, go blonde or something. I just thought that like there was an interesting idea in what they're doing with both of those characters, and that should have totally been the movie, and it would have actually been really interesting. And they sort of let that go in terms of just having a big set piece at the end, which they set up at the beginning with another big set piece. But then, you know, certain things like, you know, setting up Morticia and Wednesday, they have a scene where she doesn't show up to seance and tea, but they don't set that up. So it's like, that's sad she didn't show up to a thing they were going to do as mother and daughter, but at the same time we have literally no emotional connection to that. So if you had set that up properly, you've been like, oh my god, that's their thing. I remember we had a scene previously and we saw them doing that, and it made a connection to me as an audience member, and now I totally know this part very well. And that I don't think they conveyed very well. Pugsley Gomez part sort of a little bit works, but I wouldn't say entirely. They just don't set up these relationships well. They don't explain fully what they're doing with these plot lines, and instead it comes off just rather broad in the way that just feels boring. I did take my daughter to see this. She seemed to like it. She honestly seemed to forget it pretty quickly, because when we tried to talk about it, she didn't, you know, and I'm not, I honestly just don't think this film leaves much of an impression, because it doesn't try to leave an impression, because it doesn't even know what it is impressing at all. It's just sort of like kind of there. It's decently fun or whatever, but I've taken her to other movies like, you know, Toy Story 4, which is very good, or Abominable, which isn't my favorite thing in the world, but I still would love to watch with her again. This I kind of think I could never bring up again, and she won't remember it, and I probably will forget about it also. This directing team, Conrad, Vernon, and Greg Tiernan, previously made Sausage Party. Conrad Vernon had a career at DreamWorks, even made Madagascar 3, which was rather strong, and Shrek 2, and Monsters vs. Aliens, and this just doesn't feel like they, you know, you have this interesting directing team from a film that, you know, not my favorite or anything, but it's interesting they went from an R-rated film to now kids animated film, but they're not really like, why are they doing that? They never really kind of answer you in that way, and I kind of expected maybe a little bit more after they had this huge different, you know, no one gets an R-rated kind of comedy animated film success. Like, you know, now you're back. What what have you learned from it? And in a way, they've learned they can be sloppier storytellers, and they can kind of get away with enough of a gimmick that everyone will go see it. It's like they totally learned the wrong lessons. I think they'd be better storytellers from all of this. I had a fun time with my daughter seeing The Addams Family, but I don't think The Addams Family will ever really leave much of even a ghost of a memory when it's all done. This is kind of like coasting on the fact that it is The Addams Family, and not reminding you and kind of rejuvenating the franchise. It's more rejuvenating it because we're talking about The Addams Family, but it's not rejuvenating it because we're talking about this movie. So if you've seen The Addams Family and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.